We do not have the human and technical resources to educate our own country. Very simple. India has been, average education in India is about 5 years. It used to be 3 years, 10 years ago. 5 years of education, average Indian. 90% of India, or let's bring it down to say 85%, but a very large proportion of India is pure, simple dropouts, have not completed 8th or even 10th grade, 8th or 10th grade. And so, you have a population of about 10 to 15% that has passed high school, is in, and only about 2 or 3% at the PhD level. And then we are trying to get this workforce to be trained, to become educated, to get all the children to be educated. We do not have professors. We have universities, and we have people called professors. But if you were to try to put their lectures online, I think everybody would know who's, as in India we say, "Kaun kitne pani mein," who is in how much water. It doesn't translate very well. But, and I've suggested to many people, why don't you put all these lecturers, professors' lectures online and let people figure out which college they want to go to? Because there's a mad rush in a place like Delhi. They keep complaining that we can't get into good colleges. And the answer finally comes back, well, if you want to go to a good college, who's paying the college professor in the first place? It's the government, isn't it? So the government owns that lecture. So why would I want to go to a particular college to listen to that professor? If the government is paying, why not put that guy's lecture online so anybody can see, anybody can discuss? So I don't understand in this day and age why this whole mad rush about going to one institution. Institutions, and this is one controversial thing I'm going to say here, is institutions are a great barrier to advancement. They create bottlenecks. Whether it is the government or whether it is established institutions who say, I am the standard bearer, and we think that these institutions are going to bring about change. I suspect, and I suppose there are many people here who would say, contradict it and say that's not true, but I don't think in history of big changes, like in the Industrial Revolution or otherwise, institutions, existing institutions, have really not contributed to the change. Change has happened, and then institutions have reformed themselves. I don't know whether this is true or false, but that's my impression. I'm going by the simple example of Cambridge and Isaac Newton discovering everything that propelled us eventually into much more modern science. But for 100 years after he discovered those things, gravity, optics, and all kinds of things, calculus, 100 years after that, a technician, a very skilled technician, James Watt, came around, and what he did changed the whole world and the whole world economy. Until then, Cambridge was only teaching theology, theosophy, and so on and so forth, and maths and so on. But it actually did not change the world at that time. And what James Watt did took 100 years to figure out for the thermodynamics people in the late 18th century. What is happening in India today? We are sitting here, some of you are observing from outside, we are sitting in Delhi or Mumbai and looking at the country and saying this is how the country is changing. But actually if you look down at the grassroots, many interesting things are happening. People are not relying on agricultural universities to innovate in agriculture. There's a young man, at this moment, some Gandhi, young man who's funded by Bill Gates Foundation now. He started a very simple, interesting thing. What he did was, he started giving video recording lessons to young people in a village and said, okay, you go to a farmer and say, what are you doing different today? What's the problem and what are you doing about it? They would record it and spread that video in the vicinity to other farmers who would see and react to that. So it was a lateral transfer of experiences and not even the high flow knowledge that you would call. That started a buzz and people started saying it's not that way, it's this way. And the universities had no clue of this. I think his project is now spread to something like 80 odd districts, maybe it's even more, 100, 200 districts. Universities and institutions are often not clued into what's going on at the rock bottom. And this is a very bold and flat statement that I'm making. I used to be a university professor at one time. I remember that when I had to teach chemistry, my laboratory assistant, the peon as he's called in India, would come and say, don't worry, I have the pollution samples ready. We used to teach water pollution. I said, what do you mean you have ready? Where did you get them from? No, no, no. We just mix a few chemicals and that's polluted sample. I said, there's a gutter outside. There's a drainage. Why don't you get some water from there and we'll try to figure that out. No, no, that's not how it is done. You don't know anything. You are new here, so why don't I make the polluted water sample by mixing some chemicals? Because then you have to be predictable. You have to be... Anyway, so I think if you go down, the issue of human resource constraints, which is saying you can always teach them high-flown knowledge, which was something that was invented, discovered 100 years ago in a classroom. But what is applicable today is very, very difficult to figure out if you're only sitting in a university today. These are times of change. I believe a psychologist called Eric Hoffer said this in the United States, that in times of change, it is the learners who shall inherit the earth, and the learned shall be beautifully qualified to deal with a world that exists no more. And I think that's absolutely true, because people do not know. You talk about cell phones, nobody teaches how to deal with cell phones in schools. And yet, kids are using cell phones. Even in rural areas, about 88% households today have cell phones. And it's going to keep on growing. We just don't know how to do this. Teachers don't know it. I mean, that's just one example I would give. We're talking about availability. India will have 25% of India's villages will be broadband connected in the next 3 to 5 years. And while that is true, the government of India has come out with this plan to give Akash tablets at a very low-cost innovation. The problem is, I wrote in a piece that the tablet is good, but it's unlikely to cure the patient. Because the block, where is the block? The block is that all our so-called education, the high education, is in English. Localized, contextualized Indian language content is completely missing. We are so busy translating the English technical terms into Hindi that both are impossible to understand. I'll give you an example for all the guests who are here who do not understand any of Hindi. It won't make sense either way, but you'll see the point. A signal, you know, the one that goes red and green. So that was translated in Marathi as Agniratha Gamana Gamana Bhaya Pradarshaka Tamra Patika. Do you want to figure that out? It's a whole description of what its function is. Agni Ratha Gamana Agamana Bhaya Pradarshaka Tamra Patika. By the time you say the signal is red, the car has already gone and hit somebody. So I think you've got to find ways to communicate. We are not finding ways to communicate. We are not finding ways to reach the population. So the technology is great. The Akash tablet can come, we'll have the broadband, but the kid is going to be at a level where he doesn't figure out how to do this. So all sorts of things are happening. I think we have a problem. We have half-blind people leading the blind, and we want to make them all with 20/20 vision. Finally, to quote my friend Lan Pritchett from Howard Kennedy School, he said recently when we were chatting, Lan throws out these good ones every now and then. He says, it's wrong to think that institutions build success. It is success that builds institution. Think about it.